Hi guys, welcome to another episode of It's Critical. I'm your host Kritika Singh, and in today's episode we have with us Spurti Ravi, the R&D head of Good Milk India. Spurti's passion for food and technology paved her path to research and development in the food sector. Spurti now works very closely in the plant-based food industry. Let's hear more from Spurti herself. Thank you so much, Spurti, for getting on board and being a part of It's Critical. To start our conversation, I would really love for you to walk us through your journey so far.
Hi, Kritika. Thanks so much for having me on this podcast. I love what you're doing with it. And I'm really excited for this conversation that the two of us are going to have.
Thank you.
And, it's been a long journey for sure. But I grew up in a vegetarian household. I grew up in Bangalore in South India. I was a huge foodie growing up. Food was sort of my thing, even in school. I started this club called the Gluttons Club, where a bunch of us would actually cook different dishes and, get together, sort of like a potluck of sorts, but like younger, fresher cuisines. So food was sort of always my thing. But when it came to really choosing what I wanted to do for my undergraduate degree, I didn't have a lot of direction. So I pretty much went through a process of elimination.
Yeah.
And I realized, okay, maybe an engineering degree makes sense because we're going to gain something out of it, some sort of critical thinking, problem solving skills that'll come in handy.
Yeah.
But then they had an engineering in biotechnology, which was something that really interested me. I loved biology, chemistry, and really, even what the future of the pharmaceutical industry would be. So that's pretty much why I got into it. And towards the end of my degree, when I started thinking about next steps, like most of my colleagues and other students in this field were actually joining tech and IT companies.
Yeah.
And to me, that was crazy because I'm like, I spent 4 years studying biotech, and you want me to put that aside and get into IT. I stumbled upon food science, which also happened to be one of my courses in my, I think, 6th sem of biotech engineering. And I was like, this is amazing because I always loved food, right? So I could really marry that passion for food and that culinary interest that I had, along with the science that I already knew very well and I was also interested in.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So I left India to pursue a master's in food science. I went to Rutgers University in New Jersey. So one of the reasons I chose Rutgers is they had a very generic food science degree. I didn't really have to commit to either being interested in dairy or confectionery or meat, for example. Like everything was possible. It was a very like a top view, covered all the basic subjects that you needed. And yeah, I went over, I pursued my master's in food science. I loved it. I think it was everything I imagined it to be. And it was just so much fun working with food and thinking technically about it. And then I went on to do some internships and I started my full-time job at a company called Campbell Soup Company. It was at that point of time maybe around an $8.2 billion company, so a fairly large CPG in the US, where we did more than soup. We had a lot of different companies under their umbrella. And it was just a fantastic experience. And I was there for about 4.5 to 5 years almost, is what I spent at Campbell's. And during the course of my work, actually, towards let's say around 2015, I started working on this project where we really wanted to tap into what consumers were looking for in terms of food when it came to the future. So what are the millennials looking for when it came to food? What are the attributes of food that are important to them? And we started on this plant-based project. So I slowly started learning about, the importance of a plant-based diet when it comes to your health. So there was Dr. Dean Ornish, who was doing a lot of work. There was a China study by Dr. Campbell that was conducted. And I actually started familiarizing myself with them. And it was pretty fascinating that so many lifestyle diseases that are pretty much the burden of today's society actually they are pretty much driven by your diet and your lifestyle, and a plant-based diet solved a lot of them. So this was still theoretical, right? So I had my fair share of doubts. now I'm a little spiritual, but back then I was a lot more scientific in my thinking. So I was like, no, I don't know about this. And we started talking to a lot of consumers who had used a plant-based diet, especially to recover from cancer, to help with their recovery post chemo, to do it not just one versus the other, but to actually combine both so it's effective for them. And they had beautiful stories, like heartwarming stories. And I was like, I mean, if they've done this and it's actually worked for them, there should be some truth in it. And at the same time, I also started pursuing yoga quite frequently. And I think there was this whole community that was interested in veganism through yoga. So a lot of things, strangely, when I think back in hindsight, came together, at me at a very specific time. And it really piqued my interest. And I met a vegan chef. And I think that was the game changer for me. I met him, he really showed me what could be done with food, right? Because as a foodie, I don't want to give up on all the exciting things about food. A huge shout out to Chef George Vitatakis, wherever you are now. But he had been vegan for about 30 plus years. He had traveled to India and he lived in the US in the Detroit area. And he really showed me what could be done with food, right? I have a very, very limited mindset around that. Being a foodie, someone who enjoyed going to Michelin star restaurants and trying out molecular gastronomy, the fact that I had to limit myself and really, cut out all these animal-based products seemed very daunting in a certain way. And one of my favorite restaurants when it comes to plant-based foods is called Veg. It's in Philadelphia in the US. And I went there and I ate the food and it was so good. Like they do a rutabaga cheese sauce, which was fantastic. And it's made of this vegetable called rutabaga that nobody likes. So for me, it just... Yeah, probably, right? And I didn't even know what rutabaga was at that point, I think, when I went to his restaurant. So it just really opened up my mindset as to how exciting eating this way can be. It's not boring. It's not limiting. There's so much flavor you can draw out of it. And I think around that time, I also started transitioning away from dairy. I realized that it's not suiting me too much. So I never really liked the taste of milk, to be honest. I loved desserts. I loved really creamy sauces and things like that. So anything with a lot of flavor that would mask the taste of milk. But milk itself, like I never liked drinking plain milk or having it in my cereal. The cereal had to have a lot of chocolate to kind of mask the flavor of the milk. So when I started consuming almond milk, all these other nut milks, at that point of time, there was no oat milk, but it was predominantly almond and soy. I was like, you know what? I like the taste of this so much more. And the US was very developed at that point. So you would even get a lot of plant-based ice creams, which I loved. Ben & Jerry's chocolate fudge brownie, like absolute favorite. So for me, I think I had slowly started unconsciously weaning away from a lot of animal-based foods. And I decided to move back to India in 2016. It was April of 2016 that we moved back for personal reasons. We have a lot of family here and we just wanted to be closer to them and really see how India works out in terms of what both my husband and me can do in our professional careers while being close to our family. And I came back and, we stayed with my parents for a bit and I had access to so much vegetarian food that I loved and enjoyed. I think my grandmom couldn't believe that I loved, khichdi or pongal, as we call it, that much because I used to hate it as a kid. And now I would ask for it all the time. She was like, what has happened? Right. So my palate had changed a lot in retreat to Bali, where I ate completely plant-based for about 5 days, I think, both me and my husband. And I was like, I can do this. Like, I can easily do this. It's not as, daunting as I think. Part of it is also psychological, right? Because people start judging you. So when you say you're vegan or you're plant-based, they're like, oh, you want to lose weight. Why are you worried? Like all these sort of statements that, mostly come from aunties and some friends as well. But so I never wanted to be that girl who was focusing on weight and trying to limit and restrict myself. But I was like, you know what? This makes sense for me. It really sits with me on a conscious level as well. The fact that I can be more compassionate towards animals and not really contribute to cruelty. And at the same time, there was a lot of talk around environmental benefits. So it just seemed like a no-brainer. Like, I'm going to go vegan. I kind of made that statement out loud, which I never do. My family knew about it, my friends knew about it, and I was like, I'll deal with this. So 1 month became 6, 6 months became 9, 9 became now almost 3 years.
Wow.
So I just haven't looked back because it was so much more easier than I thought of. India has developed so much in terms of having alternatives. There's so much you can make at home. I never miss meat or dairy for that matter. But yeah, I think overall it was just like the right choice for me. I felt more myself when I
Yeah.
made that decision. And at the same time, professionally, I was a food scientist. I would work on different types of
Yeah.
foods that involved dairy, that
Yeah.
involved meat, etc. So when I moved to India, I made a very conscious decision that one, I decided to consult because it was more exciting for me to work with smaller, younger companies
Yeah.
who were sort of doing interesting things in the food space versus larger FMCGs. And also, I was like, I'm going to do plant-based only because there's a huge area in terms of creating impact in India,
True.
right? Nobody was doing a lot at that point. 2016, like I was still getting a lot of stuff, from my from the US in my suitcase every time I went back for any visa issues, because it just everything was available there and nothing was available here. Obviously, today is very different, and I'm so happy about that. So professionally, I decided to focus on this and consult. And finally, I ended up at Good Milk. So I did a couple consulting projects for them. They raised a couple rounds of seed funding, which also meant that they wanted more heavier R&D focus. So that's when I joined them full time, and I've been with Good Milk almost about a year, I would say, as an employee, not just as a consultant. And I'm very excited about what we're doing, especially when it comes to, the dairy alternative space here in India.
Yeah. I think
Yeah. So that was not very short. Sorry. It took a long time for me to go through that.
No, but I think your journey has been so exciting, and it's been a roller coaster ride, I would say. And you have a perspective of a developed as well a developing country, as well as a developing country when it has to do
That's
with
true.
plant-based industry or meat alternatives or in general, right? So it's actually a very good story to look at because I don't think I have any other food scientist on board with me. So it was a great, it was very insightful, to be honest. And I could relate, and I think it has been part of the entire podcast so far that there are elements of everybody's journey that I personally also relate to. So I think your khichdi story is so similar because as a kid I never liked it, but now I just indulge in khichdi or porridge for that matter. And palate, like our palate keep changing over a couple of years. It always keep changing.
Yeah.
But plant-based diet, I think it's been 6 years since I have I've turned to a plant-based lifestyle. So I think your palate
That's
also
amazing.
becomes very clear. Thanks. You start getting taste of every single food that you put in your mouth, like every single plant you
Yes.
put in your mouth.
Yes. It's not doused with butter and cream. It's like when you taste the flavor of the
True,
vegetables.
true. So, talking about alternatives, before we move into the major part of it, how important do you think it is for humans to consume milk, especially grown-ups?
So I think that's an interesting question, right? When I think about why do people consume dairy,
Yeah,
I think most of us are recommended from childhood, and that continues
yeah,
into adulthood for nutritional reasons.
yeah.
That's predominantly why, and the dairy industry has done a fantastic job in marketing and advertising it. I don't think it came from bad intentions personally,
Okay.
but I think that, they really tooted its horn very, very well.
Yeah,
And why did pediatricians, for example, recommend that children have a lot of dairy
yeah,
is because it was a good source of protein and calcium,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, but if you actually think about it, there is a plethora of options available out there. There are so many different sources
yeah,
for protein and calcium, and dairy is not the only
yeah,
one. I think that's an important thing to remember.
yeah,
Yes, it does have some protein, it does have some
yeah.
calcium. And actually, if you look even weight to weight comparison, there are some ingredients like, let's say, sesame seeds, which would do so much better on the calcium spectrum than even dairy would,
True,
right?
true.
But whenever told that, this seems like an easy option for
Yeah,
pediatricians and doctors to recommend with good intention itself. So I think people have always consumed dairy for that reason,
Yeah.
and then it becomes a habit. Anything that is sort of ingrained to us from childhood
Yeah.
becomes habitual, and to break that conditioning requires major changes, right? And I think that's what is happening today when it comes to the pushback against the
True.
dairy industry. And it hasn't happened for a very long time. It's been a very, very subtle movement for the most part. The industry has a lot of lobbying going on. So
Yeah.
the information available out there is dairy is really good for you. Some research has pointed towards that, but surprisingly, there's also medical research that says otherwise.
Of course.
Yeah. So I think the interesting thing about why people consume dairy is honestly for the nutrients.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, I think you can get those nutrients in many ways
Yeah.
and not just using animal-based foods.
Okay.
Yeah.
And talking about the fact that how advertisers and marketers have been really good at communicating the positive side of dairy to the consumers, I think it also goes back to the school system, right? Like we are taught that there's a food pyramid and a stipulated proportion of dairy and meat and egg and vegetables in our diet. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's time that we relook at how this food pyramid actually works, and do we really need the food that we probably had uh, added in our syllabus or even in our overall diet system in the past? Because at that time, as compared to now, we did not have a lot of chemicals in the food. But now if you see,
Mm-hmm.
even the dairy cows or buffaloes are given so much of hormonal injections that the milk that you get is not the same as our grandparents used to get.
Exactly. I mean, my grandmom comes from the coffee estate region, and till today they have cows on their estate, right? So everything they consume comes straight from the cow.
Yeah.
So the cow is not basically, I mean, I still wouldn't drink that milk,
Yeah.
but at the same time, for them, it's a way of, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
They actually milk the cow themselves. The
Yeah.
cow is part of their family almost.
And
When the calf is born, it's a huge
yeah.
celebration within the family. Like, oh my gosh, we have a new member. The kids are excited about it. Everyone who works on the estate is excited about it. So it's just a very different thought process. Today, we're disconnected from the source.
True.
We have no idea. We think of milk as milk, not as something that comes from the cow,
True.
right? And even I have to really change my conditioning, and through reading, through conversations, and through educating
Yeah.
myself with multiple resources, I have to sort of peel off those layers and really connect to the animal aspect of these foods.
Yeah. Yeah. And talking about alternatives and food, right? Like, do you really
Mm-hmm.
think there is milk alternative available? And if it is, what are the various options that's there?
So I think there's not one. There are tens and hundreds of milk alternatives available today, which is a great thing for consumers
Yeah.
because you have a lot of options.
True.
But what the not so great thing there is that you have a lot of options. So there isn't one direct replacement,
Yeah.
right? So it's not like here's your dairy milk,
Yeah.
here's your non-dairy milk.
Yeah.
That non-dairy milk can be made from multiple sources. It can be
True.
made from nuts, it can be made from grains, seeds. Some of them have a certain kind of nutty flavor.
Yeah.
Some of them have a cereal-like flavor. Then there's soy, which has a beanie flavor.
Yeah.
Some of them are high in protein. Some of them have no protein at all.
Yeah.
So it is overwhelming for a consumer
Yeah.
because now they have to pick based on multiple factors.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as here's my dairy option and I'm going to substitute it with a non-dairy
True.
option. So I think it forces you to be a little creative with your food. But
Yeah.
what I like about it is, so it forces you to actually educate yourself about what you're eating. And that means that you're not just going to take someone's word for it,
Yeah.
right? You're not going to just believe someone.
Yeah.
So that forces consumers to actually flip the pack. You're looking at the back of the pack,
Yeah.
which has the ingredient statement. So what are the ingredients going into your product? What is the protein content in terms of the nutrition panel? What is the calcium content? So I think that sort of engagement is very important
Yeah.
today because we're in a very, very, we have progressed so far that we really don't know where the source of our
Yeah.
food is,
Yeah.
vegan or not.
Yeah.
So this way you're actually, I think that's a great exercise, and it's also very empowering.
True.
Because now you're not going to listen to anyone. You're going to make that decision yourself based on what you know is in the product.
Yeah. And I think, to add to your point, I think as consumers we become a little more aware and informed, and it also
Mm-hmm.
helps us to, the moment we know where our food is coming from and who's behind making this entire food or what is the process, we become more of an informed and aware citizen. So there's a transition
Mm-hmm.
that happens from just being a consumer to becoming an informed and probably a citizen who thinks about the climate for the animals and for their own health. So it marries
Mm-hmm.
all these three factors together if we do that flip of the packet.
Exactly. And I think, I mean, I've done a lot of sessions as a food scientist, to groups and
Yeah.
organizations about the importance of reading food labels.
Yeah.
And I think every time I get such big eyes and gasps and oohs and ahs when I talk about what's even in their bread,
Yeah.
which is crazy, right? I mean, for me, it's a habit for me
Yeah.
to do that. That's my job. So I'm very well aware about it. But what I thought was natural
Yeah.
is very unnatural to
True.
most people. I actually love this, this movement of sort of educating yourself and empowering yourself and taking that power back. Because ultimately you do vote with your money.
Yeah.
It's not what you say you want to do. It's ultimately where you're putting your money
True.
that's influencing what you want the world to be.
True. True, and that's such a nice, thought. And with that, I think if we start becoming a little more aware, it serves a lot of purposes, not just for the food you consume, but also the money and where your
Mm-hmm.
money is going, for that matter. And
Yeah.
moving forward, I think you briefly talked about calcium and how it is important. And there are alternative sources of getting calcium rather than just
Mm-hmm.
dairy milk. Uh, but do you think that calcium from alternative sources are enough?
So I think, when it comes to vitamins, minerals, a lot of nutrients, one is the quantity that a certain food
Yeah.
contains. The other is also the bioavailability, or how much of that nutrient actually gets absorbed into your
Yeah.
body. And this entire aspect of bioavailability, actually, I was very interested in researching it during my graduate studies, but I really didn't have the time for it. But it's a fascinating area because it's very hard to determine that.
Okay.
Each body is different. What you eat that with makes a difference because that food
Yeah.
matrix
Yeah.
changes. And today we know the gut is our second brain.
Yeah.
So the microorganisms you have in your gut influences that.
True.
So bioavailability is a whole different field altogether. It requires a lot more work
Yeah.
for us to be able to understand it. But, ultimately, when I look at myself, so I actually started testing my, vitamin and mineral levels after I turned vegan because I
Okay.
wanted to make sure that there were no when it came to my health
Yeah.
because of this transition,
Yeah.
right? And I have always been calcium deficient.
Okay.
I think from my teenage years into my adult years, and I was prescribed supplement by my pediatrician and then my GP and so on. And I would take it for a while, and then some of the symptoms would disappear, and then it would sort of come back, and it was just like this
A
vicious
cycle. Yeah.
circle. Exactly. And what I noticed, and this was very unconscious, I didn't make any effort towards it, is the first year that I got my blood work back,
Yeah.
for the first time, my calcium levels were actually within the range that it was supposed to be for the first time. And I was just like, okay, this is absurd and this is weird. This is not what I expected. Because I'm used to having low calcium levels. I just kind of accepted that that's how my
Yeah.
body works. And even if I had a lot of dairy, if I had a lot of these other foods, it never really bumped up those levels. And then my blood work came the second year and it was even better.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, there's something really to it. And what I realized is when I turned plant-based or vegan, I actually started consuming a lot more different types of
Yeah.
food. So the diversity of foods that I ate increased tremendously, right?
Yeah.
I'm rotating a lot of different kinds of dals, different kinds of
Yeah.
beans, different kind of greens, not just palak, but I'm having all the local greens that are
Yeah.
available here. And all these greens, these lentils, these beans, nuts, and seeds, they're all really good sources of calcium.
Yeah.
Now, because of the diversity, I think that honestly, and the quantity, obviously, and the diversity is really what helped me bump up my calcium levels. So now I'm just like, this is amazing. I didn't even have to try. I just did a good job of eating a good plant-based
Yeah.
diet. And now my calcium levels are fixed. So I think there's something to that. Again, I don't want to generalize
Yeah.
it, but people really think that it comes only from dairy,
Yeah.
and that's really not true. There are so many great sources. Sesame seeds is my go-to when it comes to calcium. All you need is 1 teaspoon or a day,
Yeah.
and it'll really start helping you
True.
pump up those levels.
And there's also powders like moringa powder, or like
Yeah.
other green powders that you can actually have to even have your calcium levels checked in check.
Exactly.
And to be honest, like I could relate to you because initially I thought that maybe I'm going wrong, and maybe even I'm, not doing something right, and I should keep a check, because a lot of my non-vegan friends or even my family members were concerned that I might not be getting all my nutrients. So what
Yeah.
I started doing, there's an app called Chronometer, and
Okay.
I downloaded this app, and I used to keep adding every single meal that I have, or even the snacks that I eat. I was surprised because with my daily plant-based diet, I was able to sufficiently, cover all the nutritional requirements that my body had. And that app also helped me figure out which one I should cut down on, and if I'm taking too much, and which one I should make sure that I take. With a plant-based diet, people also have a lot of issues that, okay, protein is something that we'll not get.
Yes.
I was shocked to see the level of protein that my body was getting by just the plant-based diet I was having. And I started sharing this screenshot of my everyday records with few friends of mine who used to always be asking me that what if I turn plant-based, will my protein level go down? And to my surprise, they were also shocked, and two of them actually started transitioning and checking it for themselves if the plant-based diet worked for them. And it's been 6 months. They are going strong. So, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, because we're replacing one food group
Yeah.
with a diverse set of like options
True.
in terms of grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables. Because, typically an average meal, let's say even for people who eat meat,
Yeah.
it's a portion of chicken with
Yeah.
some veggies.
Yeah.
Now you're having, and our Indian meal is slightly different
Yeah.
though. Let's say it's biryani with some vegetables, or roti and a chicken curry with some vegetables.
Yeah.
But now you're basically having a dal, a sabzi, a salad,
Yeah.
maybe some, I don't know, maybe a plant-based yogurt. So you're incorporating so much more.
True.
And to me, I think a very important contextual thing to bring up here is the Indian diet is amazing. And I think
True.
we all know that,
True.
right? We have all these dals, all these beans, all these nuts and seeds, and everything that's available locally.
Yeah.
We really don't have to import millets, for example.
Yeah.
But, we're always attracted to these glamorized box foods of the West.
Yeah.
So sometimes when you make this transition, you really start appreciating what is locally available to you. And for me, when I think about what's an easy place for you to transition, or even, let's say, reduce animal-based products and increase plant-based products, India is a place to do it. Like your options, I don't have to worry when I travel in India.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to get a couple of different plant-based options. That's not the case in every country, though.
Yeah.
It's changing now, but definitely not the case. So I think if anything, we should reap the benefits of it.
Yeah.
And really, clean up the Indian diet a little bit more and embrace all the positive aspects about it.
And, as soon as you start transitioning, you also start realizing that there's so much of an environmental impact that your food is having. Like, even with a plant-based diet, our impact or carbon footprint decreases, and it becomes so low. I think after this podcast, when I do the article, I'll put definite links for people to even go and refer to these links, so that they know what I'm talking about when it comes to carbon footprint and how to check those carbon footprint there. And that also plays a big role. And before I go to the next question, I think it's also important, to understand that the meat or the food that we eat, the animals that we eat as food, actually have also got all their source of minerals and nutrients from plant or soil. So imagine you avoid that one animal from your plate, and you take that nutrient or protein directly from the soil through plants. I think we'll be getting more nutrient and more, vitamins and proteins and calcium that our body needs than when we put an animal in between the soil and us.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point you bring up because, see, ultimately, what the animal is doing is intensifying the
Yeah,
calories, right? So it's taking, like, it's going to eat 100 calories and give you, let's say, meat worth.
yeah,
I don't quote me on these numbers.
yeah,
We'll share the links for the article.
yeah,
But there's an intensification that happens. Like,
true.
I think for every calorie of chicken, you need to feed them like 9 calories of food.
Yeah,
Uh, Whereas we could be eating those 9 calories directly and
true.
deriving the benefits from it. That's one aspect. And the second aspect is not to mention animals' health,
Yeah,
right? And now, when we're consuming animal based products, and if the animal is not healthy, which most of them today
are
are
not.
not, because, yeah, because of just the conditions in which they're being reared, raised, milked,
Yeah,
whatever it is. So there is antibiotics involved, there's hormones involved, there's pesticides, there's blood, there's pus,
yeah,
like all these things in our products. And when you think about it, it's kind of
yeah,
gross, right? Like it's really gross to think about it. But we're just not conditioned to think about those things.
true.
We just assume this is how milk is made,
Yeah,
or this is how meat is going to be.
yeah,
So by removing that animal, you're improving the quality of the food.
true.
Any of the ill effects, our exposure to diseases, coronavirus and the pandemic has really highlighted
Yeah,
the fear when it comes to animal-based foods,
yeah,
because ultimately it started in a wet market. So the more that interface between humans and animals reduces, and the more we sort of put ourselves in these places of eating wild animals
yeah,
or even domesticated ones,
yeah,
right? Like our we're more prone to these kind
true.
of diseases. We're making it easier for the virus to spread.
Yeah,
And surprisingly, the world has realized that the consumption of meat has gone down drastically
yeah,
over the last couple months. So
yeah,
it and there's a positive element to that, right? It goes to say that consumers are sort of aware about it.
yeah,
If you weren't afraid, you wouldn't.
yeah,
Every year there's a swine flu,
yeah,
there's a bird flu, there's something or the other.
yeah,
You never have like a tomato flu, I don't know, or a potato flu or
yeah,
something like that, right?
yeah,
I mean, yeah, they have pests and diseases,
true.
but then those crops are not consumed.
Yeah,
It's as simple as that. So I think, reduction and elimination of animals and kind of directly going to that source is not only helping you make more use of the land,
yeah,
but also at the same time reducing with cows. Obviously, you have the whole methane gas
yeah,
issues, but also at the same time, it's just giving you cleaner, better for you food.
yeah,
And I am going to bring in my spiritual side here, and I think, in India, we do have those principles of ahimsa, like
yeah,
Jainism,
yeah,
Buddhism, that you don't want to hurt other
yeah,
animals. And in general, I think we all, whether we're Jain or not, we all have that ingrained into our culture of you treat other people really well.
yeah,
You always practice, like Gandhiji practiced
yeah,
nonviolence, right? So these elements are in our culture.
yeah,
We're just disconnected from it. And we just kind of need to find that place. And it's so much lighter on your conscience to know that you are not eating foods that come out of suffering. It's just really as simple as that. And I would like to mention, when it comes to dairy, it's like you're going to your friend's mom and having milk that your friend should have had
yeah,
directly from her,
yeah,
which is so weird, right?
yeah,
We're doing that just with another species.
yeah,
Like you would never do that.
yeah,
So I think we really need to think about other species as sentient beings, right? A mother and child relations, or cows or pigs or chickens, it's absolutely universal. And when a mother is separated from the child, there is a lot of
yeah,
grief. Like just think about yourself. I'm a woman of childbearing age.
yeah,
I'd like to have kids someday. If I had to like really go through that entire process of pregnancy,
yeah,
I had to really have my hormones change, so I start lactating and I start producing milk for my baby. My baby gets taken away,
yeah,
and I need to pump that milk and give it to someone else who's going to be pretty thankless and even probably throws it in the bin because they
yeah,
don't like the taste that day. I don't know what happens.
yeah,
I would never want to be in that situation. I
true,
never want to see another mother in that situation.
true.
So I think we really need to bring in that sort of lens, and I think it will happen with a matter of time. I've seen some beautiful changes. I'm not a stickler about one way or the other. I think reduction, any way you can reduce the
Yeah,
amount of animal-based foods you're consuming and
true.
increase the plant-based foods, you're going to see huge benefits for your health, for your consciousness, and just overall, I feel like your aura changes.
That's so true. I think everything that you said made so much sense to me, and like to be honest, I got goosebumps thinking about the whole aspect of
Oh,
where you put yourself or like humans in the place of animals, and I think that's where we need to make the connect. And the day we start doing that, uh, we'll ourselves not want to eat or consume animals in the way that we do
Yeah.
today. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think before the conversation gets a little more serious, I think I should just do a quick rapid fire round with you.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, so I'll just give you one word and you'll have to answer in one word. In case there is something that you think one word is not enough, you can give an answer in a phrase or a sentence.
Sure.
So, your first word is dog.
Companion.
Money.
Dirty.
Want.
Guilty.
Frog.
Green.
Need.
Need. Not much.
Milk.
Made out of cashew.
Desire.
A better world.
Sustainability.
The way forward.
And veganism.
All about love and compassion.
Well, thank you. You were very firm with all your answers, to be honest, and it was a very...
I like them. They were very they weren't direct yes or no type of questions.
Yeah.
They kind of really made you go a little deeper into yourself. I like it.
Thank you. I just hope I do justice with Carl Jung's word association test. This is something I did as an experiment when I was in my undergraduates studying psychology. So I hope I do justice and my teachers don't come with a stick behind me.
So I'm curious to see at the end of this entire series what you draw out of it.
Thank you. Spurti, with our conversation right before the rapid fire, you had walked us through the process of keeping us in place of the animal in a dairy situation or industry. But in India, there's a slight difference. So cooperatives are the parts which run the entire dairy spectrum in India. So do you think cows and buffaloes and any other dairy milk that we get from animals, these animals actually suffer even in cooperative system, or do you think it's better than the Western world?
So to be honest, I'm not very privy to this information because I do try to stay away from a lot of cruelty videos. I find it pretty hard to process. So I have my friends do that and give me the information a lot of times. But having said that, I really don't think, ultimately the animals are a source of income for the people, right? Who are rearing those animals. Now, how can I understand the plight of those people as well. Now, they can make their earnings and they can sort of have, get their livelihood only if they can sell enough milk. Now, to sell enough milk, the cow needs to be constantly producing milk. For the cow to be constantly producing milk, it needs to be pregnant often. To be pregnant often, it's not going to happen naturally. So you need artificial insemination. There are a lot of videos that are highly cruel when it comes to how they're even inseminated because it's a pretty, think about it, right? If we have to go through that process, it's very painful. Like it's very painful. And you can hear it, right? You can see tears in the eyes of cows. You can hear them scream and bellow. And that's one. And then when the calf is born, the calf gets taken away because if the calf can't drink all the mother's milk, then he won't have anything to sell. Right now, the calf basically needs to eat something else. If it's a male calf, then the male calf is typically either as far as I know, either it goes into slaughter or it's used for leather because it can't reproduce and it can't really produce milk. Or
it's simply left on the road at times also with whatever in my personal activism space, what I have seen.
Yeah, that's really sad as well, right? Because now, unfortunately, we're not the wild, wild west. The cow can't really fend for itself. It has to be given the food. We've domesticated this animal, so it needs to be treated differently. So overall, it's just a sad date. I think if any of us had to keep cows and really get milk every day and only have milk from the cows that we have, I don't think most of us would have it, to be honest. I don't think we'd want to go through that process. And the other thing is the amount of dairy we're all consuming, right? Like back in the day, you mentioned this early on in our conversation, when our grandparents, great grandparents used to drink milk, it was very small quantities. They would make like a small katori of curd for the entire family, a little bit of ghee for everyone to put like maybe half a teaspoon on. Right now, we are just exploding with our dairy consumption. It's in every dish you can think of, right? You're having it in the morning, you're having it in your snack somehow, in your lunch, in another snack, in your dinner. Then you want dessert in terms of ice cream. So the amount we're consuming is so high that you can't really compassionately produce that much amount of dairy. It's just not humanly possible to do so. So I think the West operates differently. It's very mechanized. They call it animal agriculture, and they have a lot of machinery in place. And India may be a little bit more rural and barbaric in a certain sense, but it doesn't mean it's any more compassionate.
Okay. And talking about the entire compassion part, I think I did a small test recently as a small poll on my Instagram, and I don't have a big follower base. I just have like about 1,200 odd people, and out of them, 400 of them I think voted, and the question was, do you think dairy should be a part of the feminist movement? And I was surprised to see the response, because a lot of my friends went back and they thought about it, and the majority of audience, I think 58% or so, voted that it should. Because technically, even the animals are raped. It's technically forceful, right? And they are never asking a human to put their hands inside their vagina, and or their private places, but that's what happens in dairy. And when I look from that point of view, I feel that it is time that we talk about and aware people about the actual negative sides of dairy. And as a woman, I think we should be more empathetic towards the animals who are part of the dairy industry altogether.
No, that's very true. I think at the end of the day, it's a system of oppression, right? And we've been through our fair share of oppression, as I would say, as a gender. Maybe individually it's different, but like this collectively, it's somewhere in us that there has been oppression that we face. So, and this is just another system of oppression, like you said. So it absolutely needs to be shaken up. And I think it's just, the way I like to think about it is really think of myself as that mother, right? Like some videos that I've seen are heartbreaking. They're like teardrops in the cows. They chase like vehicles where the calves are being taken away. They don't sleep and eat for like, weeks at a row because they're in grief and, suffering because they've separated from their child. So it's just none of it seems right. I don't think if we were given an option, any of us would say yes. No. It's just that our palates are so conditioned to it. We are being selfish about it. So we need to decondition ourselves, which is going to take a little bit of time and work, but it can easily be done. And what I love is so many people who are consuming these non-dairy alternatives today aren't even vegan. And I am totally okay with that. They love the taste of this, and that's what we need. We need really tasty products where people don't feel that they're giving up on something, but they're getting something even better.
True. And like you said, I think it's about taking that one step at a time, and then at least starting to explore and experiment with these plant-based alternatives. And then I think then there's a lot of options for them to explore even beyond what there is to offer in the market, because eventually then it becomes about you experimenting with whatever you have at hand. Talking about alternatives, do you really think that switching to a plant-based alternative in terms of food also helps the environment?
Definitely. I'm not going to get into a lot of statistics here. So you have the Eat Lancet report, which was a report that came out in the Lancet Journal, which is a very prestigious journal. And they have gone through this in a very detail-oriented way without any bias. They don't support the vegan movement or plant-based movement. They were just looking at environmental impact. And they came up with what is known as a planetary diet, right? For planetary health. And that basically overlaps with a plant-based diet. So because think about it now, to rear animals, we need land.
Yeah.
So to get land, we're basically, we're getting into deforestation.
Yeah.
Most of the land today is being used to raise animals or to basically grow the feed for the
Yeah.
animals.
Yeah.
Most of what we grow is also directed towards animals in order to feed them
Yeah.
versus feed us. Then you think about antibiotics, like I think I don't want to quote the number because I don't remember the statistic, but somewhere between 70 to 90% of the
Yeah.
antibiotics goes to animals,
True.
right? Which is all crazy if you think about it. But from an environmental perspective, the land being diverted towards this
Yeah.
only because we crave for meat, we crave for dairy,
Yeah.
just doesn't make sense. We've got to change those cravings, right? We've got to crave for, I don't know,
Yeah.
beans, and we've got to crave for greens and crave for fruits.
Yeah.
That's where we need to be. So I think the Eat Lancet paper is a great one for anyone interested in understanding climate impact
Okay.
when it comes to what you eat. And they've pretty much said the most impactful change that you can make today if you are worried about the environment is to reduce your consumption of animal-based foods. It's as simple as that. Elimination would be fantastic, but even if you reduce, let's say you start at 100%
Yeah.
and you go 80% next year,
Yeah.
60% the year after that, you're still helping the environment.
True. True. And thank you so much. I think I'll also add this link and the report link to our article so that whoever wants to go through and review it, they can have a look at it. And moving forward, I think I would really like you to shed some light on your work at Good Milk.
Sure. That's like the exciting, fun part. So I've actually been a part of their journey from early on.
Okay.
So the founder at that point, Abhay, and his mom actually started this as a small home operation.
Okay.
He was a passionate vegan activist. And every time they basically spoke about veganism, people were like, we'd love to try it, but there's nothing available in the market
Yeah.
for us to be able to use and make this transition easier. Not all of us can sit and make milk and curd and all these things
True.
at home. And that's kind of why the company was born, which is just a very sweet story. And his mom used to make products and he used to actually go door to door selling them.
Okay.
And he's quite the feisty young guy when it comes to making sure that he enables people to transition to a more compassionate lifestyle.
Okay.
And I consulted with them early on when they were about to commercialize their yogurt. So it was a peanut-based curd. I would say curd, actually, that's right in the Indian context. It's more like dahi than I would say American Western-style yogurt. And so his mom just couldn't make any more. So they had to scale it up. So that's where I sort of came in and I worked on that project and we launched it in a commercial format.
Okay.
And it's one of my favorite products. It's very close in terms of nutrition when it comes to dairy curd. And, obviously it's much more compassionate. It's clean when it comes to hormones, residues, pesticides, all of that.
Yeah.
And then recently last year, we launched our milk, which is cashew and oat based.
Wow.
So we've worked very hard to make sure that it works in the Indian application. And what I mean by that is in the West, when you have a lot of almond milk or any of these other nut milks, people put very little milk in their coffee.
Yeah.
Their coffee is also fairly diluted.
Yeah.
It's pretty much black coffee generally. Or they have it with their cereal. The way they consume dairy is very different. In India, it has to work in chai really well. And it has to work in South India in filter coffee really well. That's what we like consuming. And now that means you need to be able to boil the milk for a long time and the milk needs to be stable, right?
True.
So we've done a lot of research and development and gone into it technically to make sure that the milk can actually be converted into a chai, can be used in a chai, can be used in a filter coffee, and it's not going to split or curdle, which is what happens if you were to make an almond milk at home.
Yeah.
So that's something that has done fantastically well, and especially I'm surprised, but during this entire coronavirus lockdown, our sales have skyrocketed.
Wow.
Which was even interesting for us. Like our production has gone up so much. That's what I'm worried about half the time is, do we have enough raw materials to make enough product for the demand that we have, right? Which is a great problem to solve for. My work with Good Milk is all focused on products. I lead their research and development. So I'm looking at things very technically. I am inspired with my exposure in the West as well, because I know what's possible. I've done some work in the space there. But at the same time, my approach is I really want to use an Indian lens when I work on these products. I don't want to develop something like a yogurt that's like a pudding, because that's how they eat yogurt in the West. But for us, you need dahi that you can scoop out. You should be able to make it into a raita. You should be able to make it into a curry. Like those things are important. So those are our flagship products. We also have a mayo and a butter. Our mayo does really, really well. And a lot of non-vegans and non-plant-based folks actually buy our mayo. They absolutely love it, which to me is, it's just, that's the best compliment, right? When someone buys a product because they like it and they don't care whether it's vegan or not, then, it's a job well done. And mayo is, I would say, technically a little bit more easier to execute. We do have a butter out that we're working on reformulating to make it a lot better for the consumer in terms of health and also in terms of taste. So that's something that I'm very excited about. But it's just, it's very satisfying that the work that I'm doing, because it's sort of my professional experience. It makes sense why I got into this field, because I can apply it into an area which I am so interested and passionate about today, right? It's funny. I think you only realize it in hindsight that everything comes full circle. As you're going through it, you just don't. So yeah, I think we've also gotten really good responses from investors. We haven't had any issues with funding, which is very important for a startup, especially a food startup, because it's more capital intensive than some of the others out there. And those are all good signs. So for me and our team, I think it's just fingers crossed. We're keeping our heads down, working as hard as we can. It's been challenging couple months because our demand has been more than we had planned for. But at the same time, that's exactly what we want. We want more people to be asking for our products.
And that's exciting, right? Because that also shows how people are moving towards a plant-based milk product. So it's actually great. And talking about that, how do you think is the Indian plant-based dairy market at the moment?
So I think when it comes to a branded presence, we're lacking that. So I would say Good Milk is probably one of the only companies that sort of really focused on plant-based dairy. Like that's our mission, right? But we do have SoFit, which is owned by Hershey's, that sells soy milk, and they've been doing so for a fairly large period of time. They've been around for a while. Soy milk is a tricky one, I think, globally and for Indian consumers. It has that beany taste, which just doesn't work well in your chai, coffee. It's a tough one to adapt to. Although nutritionally, it's a very, very nutrient-dense product. I think just the flavor doesn't work for Indians and most of the West as well. For most of the West as well. There are some other brands that are doing almond milk and things like that. But I think there is lack of that branded presence with someone who's very specific in their objective and their mission. And I would love to see more plant-based dairy startups or come up, right? Because we need more people to sort of build this category as a whole. And I'm hoping it changes over the next couple of years. And for us at Good Milk, what's really important is that we not only make products that are functional, right? Where you can use it instead of your dairy counterpart. And it makes it very easy for you. But it also needs to be affordable. Now, Indians are very, very price sensitive consumers for good reason. I think everyone loves a good bargain. They love to negotiate with their sabzi wala every morning to get 1 rupee taken off the, coriander bunch or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, what they're looking for is value add. So for us, it's important for us to really price our products as effectively as we can while being able to run a sustainable business, because that is going to incentivize people to even try these products. Like the almond milk that's available on the market right now, it's at around, I think, 275 to 300 rupees per liter. And dairy is, even your highest premium dairy is probably around 65 to 75 rupees. Around 65 to 75 rupees. That's organic. And, it has all those other buzzwords around it. So you're talking about a huge difference. So if some family is consuming, let's say a liter every 2 days, that's a lot of money being allocated to it. So for us, making sure that it is value added and as affordable as possible is very important. We develop our products around it. We develop the process around it. We've set up our supply chain around it. We want to keep our margins just enough so we can operate as a sustainable business. Because at the end of the day, if we can't be profitable and operate as a business, we can't service consumers anymore. So that's also important. But we want to be mindful of the fact that, these are available at the lowest prices. Now, there's some aspect of that which is also systemic in the sense, GST rates are very different for dairy. Dairy is a highly subsidized industry. Which we're just not, right? So there are some systemic changes that are required, but I think that's more of a long-term game that we can't really depend on today. But also, like, what's exciting on that front is, like, we did a collaboration with Blue Tokai, which is a coffee chain. I think they have about 24 outlets across the country. And our partnership with them is such that people can actually sub their dairy milk with our good milk at no additional cost. Like, if you go to most cafes, you have to pay, I think, between 25 rupees to 100 rupees, depending on whether it's soy milk, almond milk, etc. And if you're paying, let's say, 150 rupees for a coffee and you have to pay another 100 rupees, like 250 it's a sizable chunk, right? So our partnership with them, and obviously it's from both sides, both of us were okay with sort of, shaving our margins and making sure that we offer consumers this opportunity to have something that's plant-based and vegan without them having to spend additional money. And I'd love to see more collaborations like that come up, because truly that's what is going to, at least remove that barrier. Because price, in my opinion, can't be a barrier for this at this point. We need to keep that down as much as possible. What we really need to work on, and for me, what the task is today, we have a milk, but it needs to get even better. How can it taste more like dairy? How can it be creamier? How can it be richer? So, they're all not easy challenges, but something that we're, constantly working on.
Well, thank you so much for the insights that you gave in with respect to the job and the entire process that happens at Good Milk, and also about the subsidies. People always have this complaint that dairy alternatives or plant-based milk or food is very expensive, and especially when it comes to dairy. So I think, like you said, the moment more and more companies come in or chip in, or they start inventing things, I think that's when
exactly,
and that's when the parity will come between a dairy product as well as a plant-based product. That's my opinion. I mean, you would shed a better light on it.
So I think that's an important point to bring up. We absolutely need systemic changes, like even GST. The GST we pay on our products it's between 5 to 12%, depending on the product. Whereas the GST that you pay for dairy is 0%.
Wow.
So right there, you're paying, let's say, 12, and it may even go up to 18%, I think, for one of our products. You're paying up to like 12% extra just for GST, right? And we're also paying this for the raw materials, like you mentioned. So I think they're all important to take care of. The other thing to keep in mind is scale. The larger the quantity of product we produce, the more economical and efficient we can make the system to bring the price down. So as our products scale, I think it's just going to put us at a better place to hopefully bring the cost down even further. And our goal is absolutely to be at parity with dairy, no questions asked. I think when it comes to cost, we want to be rupee for rupee exactly where dairy is.
Wow. I mean, all the best. I think hopefully with people choosing and opting for plant-based milk, I think we'll soon be there. And I think coronavirus lockdown has also given a lot of time for us to think about our consumption and the way we consume dairy. So I'm hoping that we are going in the right direction, and that Good Milk actually come up with a lot of more variety of options, and hopefully in the future the prices come down, that it is accessible to even the tier 2, tier 3 city citizens.
Definitely. No, I love that. I think we'd love to be working with children, having some of our products being available and part of the midday meal schemes, right? Because at the end of the day, it's still nutritious. I know that our milk doesn't have as much protein as dairy milk has, and it's something that we're working on. But how can we really bring products out and even maybe have some meaningful partnerships where we can reach the rural people? That's ultimately the goal, right? Like, if they can actually, they can have their cows and sort of treat them as part of their family, maybe grow oats and almonds and cashews and those things for us. And at the same time, consume products like this because it is affordable to them. Like that is ultimately the dream.
Well, thank you so much, Spurti, for giving us your time. I think it was a really enriching conversation for me, and I hope the audience also get a lot of insights out of this. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to, sharing the entire references that you have with the audiences on the article.
Thanks so much, Kritika. I think this was fantastic. I rarely get time to sort of take a step back and think about why I'm doing this, because you're sort of just in the, in the rut and in this fast-paced world where we're just trying to troubleshoot and problem solve all the time. It was just a really great conversation that even reminded me of why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's just been so long.
Well, I'm glad that I could, with this podcast, I was able to do that for you. So I'm really happy that this happened.
Great. It was fantastic talking to you, Kritika.
Thank you.
It's just a really great conversation that even reminded me of why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's just been so long.
Well, I'm glad that I could, with this podcast, I was able to do that for you. So I'm really happy that this happened.
Great. It was fantastic talking to you, Kritika.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to us today. In case you would want to connect with Spurti, her LinkedIn link is in the description below. You can also connect with Spurti on her Instagram handle @supper.pop.up. It's @supper.pop.up. You can connect with It's Critical on Instagram @ItsKritikal It's @It's Critical Podcast. You can connect with us on Twitter on @ItsKritikal Pod. It's It's Critical Pod. You can also watch this video on YouTube, the link of which is in the description below. I would also like to thank my colleagues Jonathan Lusto and Sid Bishnu for doing all the hard work and putting in all the efforts in making this podcast a reality. Happy listening.